So we're here to introduce the two producers of the Bay Area Moth, Jillian Robertson and Megan Jones. We can do a little. So just to get started, why don't you guys tell us a little bit about yourselves and how long you've been a part of the Moth?
Sure, I'll kick that off. Cool. I've been involved with the Moth actually longer than it's been in San Francisco. So back in the day, it was in other cities, but it hadn't come here yet, which now seems crazy. Yeah. But it was traveling with another show called the Tour de Fat, and they offered them a stage, a Moth stage within that festival. And because it was a bicycle beer festival, they had the Moth story theme, I think, was Life in the Bike Lane. And so they put out a contest for anyone who wanted to submit a story on that theme. And 4 people were going to get chosen to tell the story at the stage, at the event. And I actually got picked. I submitted this crazy story about biking 700 miles through Southeast Asia. Whoa. Yeah, it took a long time. But one of the other 4 was actually the producer, Anna, who came before the 2 of us. Mm-hmm. And so when they approached her and said, hey, we want to bring the Moth to San Francisco, are you guys interested? She called me and said, oh my God, the Moth is coming to San Francisco. And I started volunteering and eventually, stuck around long enough, and here I am.
So I've been with the Moth for almost a year, and I came on board. We had 2 producers before us, and there was a transition period, and I have a friend who works at Snap Judgment, or worked at Snap Judgment, if any of you listen to that radio show. And she recommended me, and I talked to New York and Jillian, and that's how I got involved. I have a background in radio and storytelling and improv comedy, so it's been really great.
Very cool. Very cool. And I imagine most of you know, but in case anyone on the live stream or watching this on YouTube does not know, what is the Moth? And maybe you can walk us through kind of like the life cycle of a Moth production.
Sure. So the Moth was actually started by George Dawes Green in Georgia, which is a fact that I'm really proud of because I'm actually from Alabama. So definitely a rich storytelling tradition in the South. It was started in 1997, and the Moth is a nonprofit. And it's really a huge organization. There's a lot of components to it. There's the radio show, there's the podcast, there are the live events that we participate in. And also some really great programs. There's an educational program, one that works with high school students. I think over 350 high school students have told stories. It's really great. They have a corporate program. It's a really amazing organization that promotes the art and craft and community of storytelling.
And as far as the live performances, as you said, that are here in the Bay Area, what is the life cycle of those from the Story Slam to the Grand Slam to the main stage and beyond?
Sure, absolutely. So the Story Slams are kind of our bread and butter. They're a once a month in each city open mic show, essentially. So I think what people don't know when they listen to the podcast is there is no barrier to entry with the Moth, which is one of the things I love about it. But the open mic shows, anyone can show up, put their name in the hat, get pulled out and tell a story. And the evolution beyond that is if you win, you go on to the Grand Slam, which happens twice a year at the Castro Theater, which is we just had ours back in October. And so that's kind of you're judged in the open mic setting, and then you win, and then you go on to the Grand Slam. And then the main stage is something a little separate. It's a once a year kind of showcase. So sometimes storytellers come in from around the country or even around the world, because we have shows in Dublin and London and Sydney and Melbourne. It's really gotten international.
There's been one in Antarctica or something like that. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And it's a great thing because one of our storytellers in the Grand Slam was actually and the winner was actually someone who came to a story slam in Berkeley, and she wasn't going to tell a story. She was just going to be in the audience, and her friend kind of goaded her into it, and she won and went to the Grand Slam and told a story there and won the Grand Slam.
That's amazing.
It is amazing.
It's so cool how it's just everyday people just sharing a part of themselves. And so off of that, what role do you guys play in making sure that Bay Area stories make it to the NPR podcast?
Yeah, so a big thing that we do once the show is complete is we pick stories that really are standouts, and they aren't necessarily even the winners. I mean, obviously the winning stories are noteworthy, but there will be stories that are just kind of this unique take or just an interesting story that maybe didn't quite rise to the winner level, and we kind of send those along and flag them because we want to see the Bay Area represented on the national podcast as much as everyone else. So yeah, we definitely try to showcase those really stellar stories.
Wonderful.
Absolutely. And so Jillian, you touched a little bit on like your first story at the Tour de Fat, but Megan, was there a story or anything that got you connected to the Moth that really said like, this is it, I'm going to get more involved?
Yes. So I moved to the Bay Area a little over, I guess it'll be 4.5 years now. And when I got here, I got into radio documentary, and I was working on doing some storytelling at other storytelling events here. And I won tickets to go to a Grand Slam through KALW, one of our media sponsors. And I took a friend with me who, both of us, we had met through another storytelling gig. I was like, hey, do you want to go with me to the Grand Slam? He was like, sure. And so we get there, and it was really great because when you're with one of the sponsors, you get to sit down front. And this woman came on stage and told the best story. She was absolutely charming, and the whole audience was just delighted by her. And her name is Neshama Franklin, and she is one of our beloved storytellers and a volunteer.
Awesome.
She's great.
And for you guys, we're going to show you the video of this woman's story. So let me just hop off real quick.
And you can catch Neshama at the Story Slams each month. I was a volunteer with her last month. She is an absolutely wonderful human.
Yeah, and as a storyteller, very much a professional at this point, she's done it so many times. We actually bring her to the Grand Slam. I think her official title is Story Wrangler. For anyone who's gone on to the Grand Slam, a lot of the times they're really nervous, and so she kind of calms the crowd.
Okay, here we go.
Naked. And it wasn't a dream, it was real life. But it wasn't really a stage. It was a kind of grimy, carpeted platform. And I wasn't completely naked. I had a homemade G-string on. What was I, a mother of young children, doing at the Roaring Twenties nightclub in 1967 in San Francisco? Well, I had come from New York City, where I had been a dancer, but I never got paid. And I was taking classes from Dancers Workshop Theater. And my teacher was A.A. Leith. I never found out what A.A. stood for, but that's what we called him. And he too had 2 young children, and you don't make a lot of money as a dance teacher. So he had a brilliant idea. He went down to North Beach and he talked to the nightclub owners, and he said, look, the tourists want to see what it's all about, but it's scary on Haight Street. There are weird people, they're stoned, they're dirty, they're dangerous. If you come to the nightclub, you can sit with your drink, and we will bring them the psychedelic experience. So what I was doing on that stage was I was about to do the hippie dance of love. Now, you know, because you need a partner to do it. He had chosen from among the class members, and he chose me, and I would get paid for what I loved to do. Now, you should know what A.A. looked like. He had kind of stiff, brownish hair. He tried to grow it long, and he wore steel-rimmed spectacles. He was very nearsighted, and he had a beard and a very stern expression and bandy legs. He did not look like a hippie or a dancer. He kind of looked like a botanist. Now, what I looked like, but first I have to tell you what in the Roaring Twenties the iconic girl in the swing looked like. She was the other act. And in this gilded swing, she swung over the heads of the drinkers. She looked like a Vargas pinup. She had the long legs, the pointed feet, the pneumatic breasts, the big blue eyes, the cascading hair. Oh, what did I look like? Well, I'll tell you. But first, our costumes. AA wore a headband, love beads, and a loincloth. And I wore a translucent kind of light show caftan I had made, easy on, easy off, with that G-string. And so this is the way the dance worked. We came from opposite corners, kind of like boxers. And we met in the middle with that gesture, and then anything went. And the two rules were off come the clothes and down come the bodies at the end. We were to be in close proximity, lying on that stage-ish thing. And other than that, we can do anything. Now, the deal with the clothes off was not so big, because you remember this was 1967. Hot tubs, frolicking in the woods, happenings. I mean, you know, we did it. But I had some trepidation about what would happen when I took the caftan off. I was afraid they would laugh. And you know, they did. But I had prepared myself for this. I did a kind of a keto flip in my head, and I decided that I was projecting irony, because it was so ridiculous what we were doing up there. So I did the hippie dance of love, very camp, and they loved it, and so did I. And I thought, you know, maybe this could be my real career. 25 a night. You know, and a lot of time to read in the dressing room. And I forgot about some realities, like time. The Summer of Love was not called the Summer of Love for nothing. And gravity, the nubile body would start to sag. And reality, because the dance was getting a little stale. We were doing the same thing every night. And you remember those children? I would come home really revved up and kind of go to sleep and then have to get up and take them to co-op nursery school early in the morning. I knew when it was over. I handed my G-string and caftan to the next person in line. And that was Meredith. That's Meredith Monk. Some people may know her as an amazing choreographer and composer. And she comes to the West Coast periodically, and I check in with her. We sit around the table after the performance, and she's surrounded by her acolytes. They all have designer glasses and black turtlenecks. And she looked at me and she said, "Hey, Neshama, you remember when you gave me my first G-string?" And their jaws just sagged. Yeah, of course I remember. You know why? Because I believe we are all like Russian nesting dolls. And everything we've done and everything we've been is right inside us. You just twist off the top and lift it out. It's intact. So just know, when you look at an old lady with frizzy gray hair, you have no idea what she's been up to, or for that matter, what she
Makes me want to clap.
I think a story like that just deserves such a round of applause.
Yes.
And I'm sure Neshama's gotten on stage countless other times and really just swept the crowd away. She has such a flow and her heart is just poured out with everything she says.
Yeah, we have this theory with Neshama that she could tell a story about anything. She actually got up at one point and told a story about eating ribs. No joke, and acting it out, nom, 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 nom. And I could have listened to it for like much longer than her story actually was. She just has this really dynamic way of telling a story.
Definitely, and you can see that, which is very cool.
Yeah.
So I don't know how many of you have been to the live storytelling events, but it's one of the safest spaces, most encouraging spaces that I've ever experienced. And so we were wondering what role you think the Moth plays in creating that safe space.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that I always tell people, both storytellers and we have some just guest judges in the audience, just pulled from the audience, is that it's, you know, like a comedy audience, the hecklers. I tell people the Moth audience is the flip of that. We legitimately had someone come up, it was her first time telling a story, and she just blanked, completely blanked, was staring at the mic, couldn't think of what to say. And from the back of the crowd, like our venue holds 350 or 400 people, we just hear, "You can do it." And it sounds crazy, but that's the kind of environment that has been cultivated. And thinking about like why that happens or why that Moth audience is the way it is, I think it is that you see right there the person next to you got up and told a story. It's not a professional. It's not, you know, it's just someone who has something really cool to share. Yeah. And I think you're more inclined to root for that and support that. And it's just something kind of cool that we have. Mm-hmm.
And bouncing off of this kind of safe, brave space that the Moth itself creates, there's a community around it for listeners and storytellers alike. Do you see that happening in the Bay Area, in Berkeley and here in San Francisco?
I definitely think so. It's amazing. We usually we're so lucky, we usually fill our venues, both of them in San Francisco and Berkeley each month. And at the Grand Slam that we had recently, such an intense bond happened with all of our storytellers because, you know, you're getting up at the Castro, and the Castro holds 1,400 people. Remember I told you there was a woman, it was her second time telling a story, and she was doing it in front of 1,400 people. And in the green room, they were all getting together and planning when they were going to see each other, and now they're all friends, and they're going to come back to a slam together. It's really amazing.
Yeah. A silly anecdote to go along with that. A lot of the times they're so nervous they all kind of go in their separate corners. But for whatever reason, this crowd, I mean, they just really got along, and they are planning on coming to another slam together. And someone said it felt like they all went to summer camp together. So as a joke, I pulled up a design site and I made them a summer camp t-shirt. And it was, you know, I had a story-worthy week at camp. I won a slam.
One day I'll own one of those. And so being here in the Bay Area, we have such special storytellers, and having gone to a few shows, I've gotten to know a few of the storytellers. You see a lot of the same faces. Do you also feel that our region has a lot of similar stories, similar themes that we hear here in the Bay that might be different than the stories we're hearing in New York or Chicago?
Yeah, I feel like, you know, one of my favorite slam themes still is only in San Francisco. Just because everyone, I think, has, if you've lived in the Bay, generally, you know, you've had that story that ends, well, only in San Francisco. And it was just a really good night of storytelling. But I'd say generally themes around LGBTQ stories. And people also, I think what is cool is people coming from other areas because of what the city represents. You know, it is a place where you can be yourself and not be judged. And there's a lot of those, you know, I came from far away. And actually one of our Grand Slam stories was about a woman who's a butch lesbian, and she really, she talked about the bathroom police, which is very relevant right now, but how she just, every time she walked in, she felt judged. And like she eventually got to this point where it wasn't external anymore, it was internal, and she felt, you know, really okay, and that got a standing ovation. It was very sweet. But I think those are some of the stories that we get just because of this community in this area.
Yeah. I think we're really lucky too because of having the two venues, East Bay and San Francisco. I've been really excited to see a lot of intergenerational participation. You know, people tend to have opinions about San Francisco and Berkeley and you know, what the population makeup is. And as you can see, I mean, like, people went ape for Neshama, and they continue to go ape for her all the time. And what's great about that story and that kind of all of these people in the audience coming together is you related to her for this was my inner self, right? Like, and I was afraid they were gonna laugh, and they did, and I changed it. And that is the core, you know, that makes it affecting to you as a storyteller. And I think we're really lucky in that regard.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So shifting to just the art of storytelling, we've all heard stories, but I think you guys have heard a lot of stories. And so we were wondering if there have been consistencies across good stories, and if you think maybe there's a formula for telling a great story.
Yeah, we do have a joke that there's this one line that not necessarily identifies a good story, but it often is in a lot of good stories, which was, and in that moment, I realized. And it's a joke, but it often is true, some variation on that, because a good story, it's, it has a beginning, middle, and end, but it also has that moment, that like turn, that moment where, the storyteller shares something and then twists it for the audience, or it was a moment where they realized they transformed, something taught them something in a really just quick moment. And those tend to be the best stories because, everyone can identify with that light bulb moment, Yeah.
I think for me, a lot of it depends upon the storyteller embodying the story. So you get variations of stories. We tell people it has to have a beginning and a middle and an end, or what. But in reality, I think what I'm discovering is as long as you can feel the emotion that they're feeling, that it becomes a more potent experience for the storyteller, and you can see that happening in them on stage, and you're echoing that. So I feel like in watching it, it's those people who can go up and really be in their story, and feel it so that you can share that feeling with them. Because I felt that just in looking at, I've watched, Neshama's video a ton, and off this came, and I was afraid they were gonna laugh, and I felt it again. I was like, oh. So yeah, I think that connection with the storyteller through that shared emotion is key.
Yeah. And with our storytellers, as we mentioned, it's a community. There's so many people who are repeat storytellers where you get addicted to it. They're on stage. Their name's always in the hat. Are you seeing that they're growing as storytellers, that they're getting better? And what are you seeing that's getting better?
Yeah, I would say, we do see, it is really fun to see them evolve. I try not to call them my storytellers because I get kind of like mama bear about it. But I'm just so proud of them. But you really do see people, a lot of the first timers will come with a story. Like everyone here probably has a story that you tell at parties or it's just something wild and unique to you that's happened. And a lot of the times people will come to the Moth with that one story. And they'll tell it, and it'll be story driven. And then they'll realize it's like the craft of the storytelling is something they can apply to other stories that they've told or that have happened to them. So I feel like we've seen someone come in with that one story and then realize, oh, well, this something happened to me, and I could actually elevate the story worthiness of it. And that's really exciting to see when people kind of evolve in that way. Yeah.
And in that same vein, thinking of the craft of the storytelling, Nadia and I were thinking, how does this become applicable for us here in the workplace? Is this a valuable skill that we should be working on, the craft of the story? Is this something that we can use in our everyday workplace setting?
I definitely think so. I think we were talking about this earlier, and it occurred to me that I think storytelling is a leadership skill. And it's a leadership skill because when you're telling a story, you're leading someone through an experience. You want them to come with you. You want them to be with you. And so I think an element of leadership in order to get people to come together, to believe in the goal, to work all night, to get the word out or whatever it is, you have to have that ability. And I think that ability comes from being able to involve them in the story of what's going on. I don't know.
I agree. I think also something that you get from good stories is there's this really strong empathy, because if people are engaging with your story, you're tapping into something that they go, yeah. Okay, I feel that feeling. I maybe haven't taken off my gauzy thing in North Beach to reveal my G-string. But, everyone's felt that moment of, oh gosh, are they going to laugh at me? And I think, you know, those are those stories. I mean, that's applicable anywhere that you can bring someone with you, to your point,
Yes.
and you can be really empathetic.
That's a great point. I mean, you do that in designing products, right? You could create user stories, user personas, whatever you're, you know, calling it, because you want to understand, you know, the world that people are living in order to be able to create good products that they can use, right?
Yeah.
That's storytelling.
And with the level of, I would say, intimacy and vulnerability of the people sharing stories at the Moth, what do you think that does for people to hear and share those stories with strangers?
Yeah, gosh, I can think of so many stories that just show it rather than tell it. Like one, we had this guy, I know Megan, this is one of your favorites, is this guy gets up and he has PTSD. He tells that very early in the story. And he's standing up at the mic and he's sharing with 400 strangers, like his experience of that. You know, he smashed a mirror, he had all these really intense responses, and he's visibly shaking. His head to toe, his whole body is shaking. But he doesn't stop. You know, he tells the story just start to finish. And he was hugely vulnerable, but it was just, he still did it, you know what I mean? And I think that made space for everyone else to feel like they could do that too.
That was a great one.
It really was. Yeah.
And seeing what that can do with a community of strangers, do you think incorporating that level of personal storytelling into the workplace or the culture of a workplace, do you think that would be valuable?
Yes.
I think the thing is learning the art and craft of storytelling and applying it and knowing how to apply it in order to make sure that there's room for. One of the things that's great about the Moth is that it does encourage and bring to you live all of these diverse voices. Mm-hmm. And I think one thing that could be helpful is learning to be able to do that so that voices can be heard and accepted and build that community instead of kind of divide it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so right before we wrap up, we're going to switch for questions to the audience if anyone has any. So think on your toes if you have anyone.
Just raise your hand.
But just the burning question on my mind, at least, being someone who finally had the chutzpah to put her name in the hat this last week. I didn't get called on. There's no story to tell. But it takes a lot. It takes a lot to get up there and tell a story. What's the piece of advice that you give to someone who wants to get on stage, who wants to tell their story?
I mean, I would say if you have any instinct at all to do it, like if it even is just in the corner of your mind, do it. I mean, that seems really basic, but having started as a storyteller myself, you know, I was so nervous. I originally came to the Moth, it was a New Year's resolution to tell a Moth story, you know, before the end of the year, and I ended up in this Tour de Fat thing. But it's amazing, the power of the audience to make you feel comfortable once you're up there. Like, it kind of takes over. So I'm always looking for new storytellers. So if you have a story to tell, I would say trust that instinct, and then just, you know, just get up there because the audience will support you. And, you know, we all benefit from more stories being out there, so.
I think the main thing is to slow down. Because a lot of times people say, oh, you know, relax. And that is crap. Like, you cannot relax. Like, I hate being told that. Like, just relax, take a few deep breaths. Like, yeah, that doesn't work. But I think one of the most effective things that happens with good storytellers is that there's enough air in their story for you to comprehend what's going on. Pacing is really important, and yes, we do have a timer, you know, it's not like you have as much time as you want, but if you can perform an Aikido mind trick and then, you know, like slow down time a little bit inside your head, it's really beneficial to the audience. It gives them a chance to really be with you. And I think it's great. And I think the other thing is exactly what Jillian, I'm just going to echo what she said. You know, this is the only time that you get to go up and actually be the author and the editor of your story. So, you know, like I work in radio and I'm editing and, you know, like I'm the editor, you know, I'm getting to choose how to frame it. But what makes these storytelling events so special is that you own that story on stage. You know, it's like that's why I think that guy was able to muscle through it, even while he was shaking. It was incredible.
Yeah. Along those same lines, we talked about diversity and getting to kind of know your community. One other storyteller that really stands out, he only gives his name to put in the hat as a number. We don't know what the significance of that is. But he will, I remember the first time he came up, you just sign a little waiver and put your name in the hat. And he put down next to, as he was filling it out, he put down a toothbrush, a deodorant, and a small plastic razor. And he fills it out and goes back down, and he gets up and he talks about being homeless in San Francisco during or immediately after the earthquake. And you get the sense all of a sudden these items have so much more context, because you realize, well, maybe that wasn't in the past, you know, and he's talked about the homeless experience and, you know, how even in that particular setting, like, you know, the people who were recently homeless from the earthquake got different treatment than the career homeless, so to speak, or people who have been for a longer time. And it was just an insight that we never would have had access to. Like, it was a story that I wouldn't have heard in my life in any other context. So just talking about diverse voices and community, was really
absolutely
awesome.
Yeah. And now we'll take a moment. If anyone from the crowd has a question, if you could just raise your hand, and then Nadia and I will repeat the question into the microphone.
Question or story?
Question.
Is anybody going to jump up?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi. Sorry. If we...
I'm so glad you asked that. I actually was thinking about that. I think that this current climate, what we've seen is really the power of storytelling to hold people in its thrall, right? To you know, you're seeing people do stuff, you're like, how could you do that? But it's because they believe so much in a narrative. It's deeply felt. And there's a book that's just come out by a sociologist at the University of California, Berkeley. Her name is Arlie Hochschild, I think it is. And the name of it is Strangers in Their Own Land. And she's been in Berkeley for a long time, and she spent 5 years in Louisiana interviewing, and more than interviewing, really being with Tea Party supporters, because she felt like she really wanted to understand what was going on there. And her metaphor for it is, this is the deep story. Highly recommend this book. It's really great. But it's about the power of that narrative to imbue all of, you know, your decisions and actions, and just going and uncovering it and being with, you know, these people that she met had a profound effect on her. Did it change her mind? You know, like, did it move her, you know, like from one camp to the other? No, but the empathy and the understanding for her and like how she looks at things now is incredible. It's Strangers in Their Own Land, I think is what it, and I'm not like paid by her or anything like that, but it is, I think, clearly indicative, you know, of the power of, you know, like she was calling it, this deep story. It was amazing.
Yeah. Okay.
So just to repeat the question really quickly for the mic, the question is, how do you choose the storytellers in an effort to avoid biases when they're being put out there?
So this is the magic of the Moth. We don't choose the stories. It's literally someone comes up, they don't tell us the story, they put their name in the hat, and we draw it out. And in real time, you know, we're hearing the story for the first time, which I think people don't realize. Even with the Grand Slam stories, you know, we're sitting up on stage laughing at a particularly funny moment, or, you know, crying. I mean, that's happened. Crying at a particularly poignant moment because we're hearing it for the first time. And surprisingly, you don't get. We have had a couple stories that were a little, you know, not quite as coherent, but there isn't any like bad stories. So, and again, with this 3858, he tells stories that we wouldn't have had access to, and if we screened, you know, we might have not heard, you know.
Becca, there was one Moth event that Brenna and I went to, and it was only women who spoke.
Yeah, that's
it was
right.
my first event, so I thought only women spoke. And then they pulled out all the other names at the end, and all the men then came on stage.
Yeah,
It was just the luck of the draw
It's a
that
random
10
draw.
women in a row were picked and 7 men stood on stage after that. So it was just like a 1 in a million chance.
Yeah.
Like,
It was
That
a
was
great
pretty
show.
well done.
Yeah, I remember our host Corey, as he pulled the last name and opened it up, he said, "We pitched a no-hitter."
No balls, no bats.
And just a quick repeat. So the question is that some people are very prepared for the moth when they go up to the Story Slam, and some people are going up very casually. What's the best way to prepare?
I mean, I have some thoughts on that one, just because when I told a story, they said, do not write it down, which I thought was really interesting, because you think, oh, I'm going to prepare, so obviously I'm going to write this story. And one of the things that makes it really relatable is that it's spoken like you would talk. And a lot of the times when you write it down, you start tweaking language. And so people do bullet points. People do, our host actually, he puts 5 words on his hand. So it'll be like lion, dog, neighbor, da, da, da. But those are literally his touch points for his story. And then the rest can kind of flow. So I would say knowing the essence of it, but not overworking it, is good, as you're figuring out how you tell your story.
It's also a rule of the moth. You cannot have notes.
Yep.
You can't bring anything on stage.
Yeah. Yeah, that doesn't happen very often, but we did have one person pull out their phone, and we had to be like, ah, da, da, da. And you could see it's like we practically had to take it away from him. It's like, no, I need that. But he did just fine. So.
Yeah. Let's give a huge round of applause for Megan and Jillian. Thank you guys so much for coming to Google today.
And
thanks for having us.
the work you do with the moth. It's really great.
Thanks.
And for anyone who is interested at going to a moth event here in the Bay Area, the last Tuesday of every month is at Public Works here in San Francisco, and the last Wednesday of every month is in Berkeley at the Freight and Salvage Theater.
Yep, and again, thank you so much for having us. I came here with a little mission, which is I'm always looking for new storytellers. So if you're feeling like if this sparks something, you want to do it, please come to our show. And even if you want to hear some great stories, please come.